If you could travel back 50,000 years, imagine another human looking back at you. They breathe, they think, they make tools, but they are not Homo sapiens. You wouldn't be the only human on Earth. That sounds impossible today. We grow up believing human history has always been about one species, us. But for most of our existence, that wasn't true. The world was once home to an entire family of humans. Some were taller and more powerful than we are. Others survived in places that would challenge even modern explorers. One species evolved on a remote island until adults stood barely 3 feet tall. Another remained hidden from science for thousands of years, known today from only a handful of ancient bones and fragments of DNA. And somewhere among them walked Homo sapiens, not the oldest humans, not always the strongest, not even the only intelligent ones. Yet somehow, we became the last survivors. It's tempting to imagine that one great disaster wiped everyone else away. But history rarely works that cleanly. The disappearance of our relatives wasn't caused by a single battle or one catastrophic event. It unfolded slowly, across thousands of years as climates shifted, landscapes changed, and different human species faced challenges they couldn't always overcome. Some adapted, some disappeared, and one by one, the branches of our family tree quietly vanished. To understand why only Homo sapiens remain, we first have to meet the human species that survived longer than any other, a species so successful that its time on Earth makes all of recorded human history look astonishingly brief. Its name was Homo erectus, and its story begins nearly 2 million years ago. Nearly 2 million years ago, long before cities, long before farming, and long before our own species existed, another kind of human began changing the world, Homo erectus. If success were measured by survival alone, they would rank among the greatest human species that ever lived. For almost 2 million years, they endured volcanic eruptions, shifting climates, changing ecosystems, and countless generations of predators. To put that into perspective, everything Homo sapiens has accomplished, from the pyramids to smartphones, fits into only a tiny fraction of the time Homo erectus walked the Earth. They weren't just surviving, they were exploring a world no human had ever explored before. Evidence suggests they became the first humans to leave Africa, slowly expanding into Asia and parts of Europe. They entered unfamiliar landscapes, filled with new animals, unpredictable weather, and environments their ancestors had never experienced. Imagine walking for years, following rivers, crossing endless grasslands, never knowing what waited beyond the next horizon. No maps, no certainty, only the instinct to keep moving forward. And somehow, they adapted. Their bodies looked surprisingly familiar. Long legs made walking across open landscapes more efficient. Shorter arms reflected a life spent on the ground instead of in trees. Their stone hand axes changed very little for hundreds of thousands of years, not because they lacked creativity, but because the design was remarkably effective. Sometimes, the best technology doesn't need constant improvement, but no species survives forever. As time passed, some Homo erectus populations became isolated, particularly on the island of Java. Changing forests, shrinking food supplies, and smaller populations slowly reduced their chances of survival. They didn't disappear overnight. They simply had fewer options with each passing generation. Eventually, after nearly 2 million years, the longest chapter in human history quietly came to an end. But another remarkable human species was already thriving. Stronger, more cold-adapted, and perhaps the most misunderstood humans who ever lived, the Neanderthals. For generations, Neanderthals were portrayed as primitive, slow, brutish, almost less human than we are. But modern science has completely changed that picture. Imagine footprints crossing fresh snow. Then a powerful figure appears through the fog, thick shoulders, heavy brow, a human but not one like us. If you had met a Neanderthal face to face, you wouldn't have been looking at a failed experiment. You would have been looking at one of the toughest humans who ever lived. Their bodies were perfectly suited for Ice Age Europe. Broad chests helped conserve heat. Powerful shoulders and thick limbs gave them incredible strength. Large noses warmed freezing air before it reached their lungs, helping them survive climates that would overwhelm most people today. These weren't clumsy cave dwellers, they were skilled hunters, capable of bringing down massive animals at close range. Archaeological evidence shows they controlled fire, crafted sophisticated stone tools, processed animal hides, and may even have cared for injured members of their communities. Some sites also suggest they buried their dead, hinting at complex social behavior and emotional bonds. For more than 300,000 years, Neanderthals thrived across Europe and Western Asia. Then, a new kind of human arrived, and everything began to change. Around 45,000 years ago, Homo sapiens entered the same regions. For thousands of years, both species shared the landscape. They hunted many of the same animals, occupied similar territories, and remarkably, they even had children together, leaving traces of Neanderthal DNA inside many people living today. But life grew increasingly difficult. Climate shifts transformed familiar environments. populations became smaller and more isolated, resources became harder to replace. Little by little, their numbers declined until one day they disappeared from the fossil record. Yet, while Neanderthals slowly vanished, another human species remained almost completely invisible. Not because it never existed, but because scientists didn't even know it was there. Most ancient species left behind skeletons, skulls, bones, entire archaeological sites. But one branch of our family almost vanished without a trace. Its story began with something so small. It could rest on the tip of your finger. Imagine brushing away a thin layer of dirt. A tiny finger bone appears, smaller than a child's. It doesn't look important, but it is about to rewrite human history. Deep inside Denisova cave in Siberia, researchers uncovered a tiny finger bone belonging to a young individual who lived tens of thousands of years ago. At first, it looked completely ordinary. Nothing about it suggested a major discovery. Then scientists extracted its DNA. The results were astonishing. It didn't belong to a Neanderthal. It didn't belong to Homo sapiens. It belonged to an entirely unknown human species. Today, we call them the Denisovans. What's remarkable is how little physical evidence they've left behind. Only a few teeth, a jawbone discovered on the Tibetan plateau, and several small bone fragments have ever been identified with confidence. Yet despite leaving almost no fossils, their genetic legacy stretches across Asia and Oceania. Millions of people living today still carry Denisovan DNA. One inherited gene even helps Tibetans thrive in the thin air of high mountains, allowing their bodies to function where many others struggle to breathe. A species that almost disappeared from the archaeological record still helps modern humans survive. Eventually, however, Denisovan populations also faded away. Whether through shrinking numbers, changing climates, or competition with other human groups, they quietly disappeared from history. But the strangest member of the human family wasn't hidden in a cave. It lived on an isolated island, where evolution transformed humans in a way that seems almost impossible. Adults no taller than a child, a species so unusual that many scientists initially refused to believe it was real. In 2003, a team of archaeologists uncovered something on the Indonesian island of Flores. That seemed impossible. The skeleton belonged to an adult human, yet it stood barely 1 meter tall. Its brain was only about the size of a grapefruit. At first, many scientists refused to accept the discovery. Some believed the bones belonged to a modern human, suffering from a rare medical condition. Others argued the skeleton was simply too unusual to represent an entirely different species, but as more excavations continued, the evidence kept growing. This wasn't a diseased human. It was another branch of our family tree. Today, we know it as Homo floresiensis. Their island home was unlike anywhere else on Earth. Giant storks wandered the landscape. Komodo dragons ruled the island. Small elephants grazed through the forests. Isolation had transformed the entire ecosystem. Large animals became smaller. Some small animals became much larger. Humans changed as well. Over thousands of generations, natural selection reshaped their bodies until they became one of the smallest human species ever discovered. Despite their size, they survived for tens of thousands of years, using stone tools and remarkable adaptability. Then, around the same period, modern humans reached nearby islands. Their trail disappeared. We don't know exactly why. Perhaps environmental change reduced their resources. Perhaps new competitors arrived, or perhaps their already tiny populations simply couldn't recover. From one challenge too many, their story reminds us that extinction doesn't always require a dramatic catastrophe. Sometimes it happens quietly. One generation becomes fewer than the last until eventually there is no one left, which brings us to the biggest mystery of all. If every human species was intelligent, adaptable, and capable of surviving extraordinary environments, why is Homo sapiens the only one still here? So, why are we the only humans left? At first, the answer seems obvious. We must have been smarter, stronger, better, but the evidence tells a far more complicated story. Neanderthals survived hundreds of thousands of years in brutal Ice Age environments. Homo erectus endured for nearly 2 million years, longer than any other human species. Denisovans adapted to some of the harshest landscapes on Earth, leaving behind genes that still help people survive at extreme altitudes today. Even the tiny Homo floresiensis successfully adapted to an isolated island, unlike anywhere else in the world. None of these humans were failures. Each mastered a different way of surviving. What may have separated Homo sapiens wasn't a single extraordinary ability, but many small advantages working together. Our ancestors formed larger social networks, ideas spread farther, tools improved more quickly, knowledge traveled between distant groups. Instead of disappearing with a single community, When drought struck one region, people could move. When hunting failed, they experimented with new strategies. Flexibility became our greatest strength. Of course, adaptability alone doesn't explain everything. Climate shifts, geography, population size, even simple chance influenced who survived and who disappeared. History rarely follows a perfect plan. Sometimes, survival depends on being in the right place at the right moment, with just enough people to keep going. For most of human history, we weren't alone. We shared the earth with cousins who laughed, hunted, explored, and struggled, just as we did today. Their voices are silent, but they haven't completely vanished. Fragments of their DNA still live inside millions of people. Their discoveries shaped our own journey, and their story reminds us of something remarkable. Humanity was never a single path. It was once an entire family, and out of that family, against incredible odds, only one branch remains.